Hi, I'm Peter Soroye, and I'm a PhD student and conservation biologist at the University of Ottawa. I study conservation biology, which is the study of trying to protect the wildlife and ecosystems across our planet. This is a really important field right now because a lot of things that humans have been doing over the last couple of decades and even longer have been really detrimental to the world around us. So whether we think about pollution or climate change or deforestation and habitat loss or introduction of invasive species, a lot of the things that humans have been doing while we're doing things like development and other advancements have had negative impacts on the ecosystems. Conservation biologists like myself and others study what are these things that humans are doing that are impacting the environment, what impact are they having on the animals and populations or the ecosystems around us, and what can we do to mitigate the negative impacts that we're having on the ecosystems and species around us. And then the final thing that conservation biologists do is try to help save or even recover populations that have already declined because of human-induced causes. So I think this is a really important field at the moment. I really enjoy it because I'm a huge fan of the outdoors. I've always loved nature, being outside, and the idea of visiting some of the incredible, wild, and wacky ecosystems and species on the planet. And so trying to save what's left so that future generations can visit it as well is something that I think is really important. The work that I do specifically in my PhD focuses on looking at the impacts of climate change and habitat loss. And so I look at both of these things independently. I look at what they do individually to wildlife, and then I also look at what these two things do together. A lot of the times these different human impacts, things like pollution or invasive species or climate change and habitat loss, a lot of these times these things interact together and they end up having a more negative impact together than they do alone. And so understanding those interactions is really important and is something that I focus on in a lot of my research. When it comes to the species that I look at, I tend to focus on pollinators and especially animals like bumblebees and butterflies. But I'm what you call a macroecologist, or I take a macroecological perspective, and that just means I take a big picture look. So I don't focus on a single species or a single population in a region. Instead, I look at a whole bunch of species, and I look at whole, dozens or even hundreds sometimes of populations across huge areas of space. So a lot of my research focuses on bumblebees across North America and Europe, and I look at anywhere from 60 to 70 or more species at the same time to try to figure out what's happening to all of these species, what's happening in common, and what species are really negatively affected, which ones are less negatively affected, and how can we tell what's gonna make a species in danger of climate change or habitat loss. Some of the work that I found shows that bumblebees are declining across these two continents, across North America and Europe, and they've been declining by a lot over the last just 50 years. And this is in a large part due to climate change, and specifically to climate chaos. Climate chaos is an aspect of climate change that we don't often think about, but it's really important and one that we notice without really noticing, I guess, is a way to say it. We're really familiar with how climate change leads to global warming. And this is a big part of what climate change does, is it makes, on average, the world warmer and warmer every year. But the other big part of climate change is this chaos that it brings with it. And so extreme weather events like droughts or heat waves or hurricanes, these extreme events become more common and they become worse and worse as a result of climate change. So heat waves in the summer, for example, have been getting longer and are getting hotter over the last few years and decades. And this is something we notice, we definitely notice when all of a sudden we need to keep the AC on a lot longer than we used to, and our electricity bills are a lot higher than they used to be. And so it's something that impacts humans, and it also impacts the wildlife as well. And really dramatically in the case of bumblebees, these extreme temperatures and these extreme weather events are really big drivers of the declines that we see in this group of species. One of the things I really love about my research is this big picture kind of macroecological perspective that I take with it. And so even though I'm focusing on bumblebees for a lot of my research, a lot of the tools that I'm developing to predict extinction risk, and a lot of the theories that I'm developing around how climate change is impacting these species, or how habitat loss is affecting those species and the interactions, a lot of these things that I'm developing are equally applicable for not just bumblebees, but also for other groups of animals as well. So we can take the tools that I use to predict extinction risk, and we can use them in birds or in bears or reptiles or amphibians or a lot of other groups of animals. And that's something that I think is really exciting, because it means that we're not just developing solutions for how to help save bumblebees, but we're developing solutions of how to save a lot of other animals. And that's something that I think is really cool about what I do. One of the other really big things that I do as a conservation biologist and as a PhD student is science communication. I think this is a super important part of being a scientist, whether you're in conservation biology or whether you're in physics or chemistry or any sort of STEM field. Being able to communicate science to other scientists is a really, really critical part of being a good researcher, because a lot of the time, even though scientists are often pictured as working alone, really they're working almost always in teams or in groups of people. You're always collaborating with, in my case, a PhD supervisor or other people who know other fields and other tools and other techniques that can help expand your research and help it have a lot more impact. And so you end up working in all of these groups, and so it's really important to be able to communicate, the finer parts of your specific niche. Not everyone's going to know the really technical words you're using or the really advanced stats or programming things that you're doing. And so being able to talk about that is really important as a scientist. And I think being able to communicate it to other people that are not just scientists is also really important. Science communication to the public is something I really enjoy doing. And I think, again, it's a really important part of being a scientist, because we need to help, I think, not only do good research and advance the scientific field, but I think ideally scientists should also be inspiring the next generation of researchers. And to do that, you need to be talking to people who are not already researchers. So I really enjoy being able to do things like go to classrooms and talk about the research that I'm doing, or or about conservation biology or ecology in general. That's ends up being a pretty big part of what I do as well. A typical day for me can be pretty variable. As a grad student, I think one of the really cool things is that you get to usually set your own schedule, depending if you're doing experiments in the lab or whatever, but usually you get to kind of figure out what you want to do in the day and then do it. So usually my day is filled with mostly research. As a grad student, that's what you do usually, is mostly just research in your specific field. And that's really fun. You get to design. Grad school is just you picking a question in a field that you really care about and getting to work on that more or less full time. So it's pretty cool. And the research that I do is mostly computational. Like I mentioned, I tend to take a big picture approach to things. And so that means I'm rarely going out into the field and collecting data. Instead, I'm working with big data sets that are already collected. Usually these data sets are sightings or records of an animal being seen or captured at a given location. And so it tells me something about where things were in the past and where they are now, and what's happened to them over time, whether they've declined in some areas or increased in other areas. And so I use these big data sets, and I tend to do a lot of programming, a lot of coding on the computer to try to figure out what's happening over time in different areas. So usually what I'm doing ends up being a lot of kind of computer science almost, or programming. Usually in statistical software like R or programming languages like Python, and that's a large part of the day. I also tend to do a lot of mapping because I'm looking over huge areas. It's important to visualize in space what's going on, and so I do a lot of mapping to figure out, what are some bright spots where animals have been increasing over time. What are some places of high risk where species have been declining over time. And so I look and I just, kind of visualize. I try to do this very often, just visualize across space what's happening. And then I end up relating this to different trends in climate or habitat loss or other things. I also, and I think most scientists do this, spend a lot of time reading and writing as well. Those are really important parts to, again, any research program, whether you're in conservation biology or engineering or math or chemistry or whatever. It's really important to try to stay current with what's going on in your field. And so you need to be, reading or at least being aware of kind of the recent advances that other people are doing around the world. Science is really international, and so you probably won't know everybody who's doing work in the field that you work in. And so it's important to kind of, stay aware of the literature, read the new papers that are coming out, and that's something that takes a decent amount of time every week at least to do. And then of course you need to write up your own results as well. It's a lot of fun to be able to do research all the time, but eventually you need to share that research. And in science, the way that we share research is by writing scientific papers and publishing these in scientific journals. And so writing is usually the end to any big project, is having to write it up. And then hopefully you share it after and you spend some time talking about it. But the end of to cap off any research, like programming or mapping, usually I end up having to write a paper about it afterwards. In a regular year, I tend to work in the lab. But of course now with COVID, I work mostly from home, and that actually works quite well for me because I'm mostly a computational scientist. A lot of the work that I can do on a laptop, or I can use a computer we have in the lab remotely, and so I can access it remotely from my home. And so most of the time nowadays, I'm working from my apartment bedroom. And I think probably most scientists are doing the same thing right about now. But on a regular year or in a non-pandemic, then I'm working in the lab. The lab that I work in is probably a little different than the stereotypical lab that might come to mind, because we don't have things like fume hoods or chemistry benches or sinks or glassware. Instead, we're basically an office. We have a lot of computers. We have a kitchen table to meet at, a whiteboard to sketch out ideas, and of course a coffee maker and microwave. The other really important thing we have in the lab is the collections that we take care of. And so these are a really important part of the science we do, because we work with these big data sets that are really collections of collections. So it's a lot of museums and different labs and research programs pooling their results together. The collections that we have are part of that. And so when we're out in the field collecting butterflies or identifying butterflies for experiments, every now and then we'll bring back specimens into the lab and we'll pin them and we'll add them to the collections that we have. And these become voucher specimens, which other people can refer back to. If they ever see a sighting of a butterfly, for example, that looks really weird, they're like, oh, this is a species that usually you don't see in this region. They could call us up and say, hey, I'm interested in this observation, and we can go into our collections and we can check that. So these collections we have play a pretty important role in being able to verify the data if we need to. Some days I'll be able to do some science communication as well, and I mentioned as well that's something I really enjoy. So if I get to do that, if I'm talking to the media about research, or if I'm going into a classroom to talk about conservation biology or about bumblebees and pollinators, or some of the things that I look at, that's always a lot of fun. I really enjoy being able to talk about my research, being able to share it, and hopefully show people some of the passion that I have, and maybe have it rub off on them. So if science communication ends up in the day, then that's a pretty great part of it usually. I've always been a huge fan of science and nature and the outdoors, and so in high school I took a lot of science courses. I remember being in the academic stream of high school and the science courses and stuff, and it was always something I really enjoyed. In university, I did my undergrad and finished with a degree in biology, specializing in ecology and evolution and animal behavior. And but actually that's not the degree I started in undergrad with. When I first entered undergrad, I started in biomedical sciences, and I was actually really keen to be a medical doctor, because that was pretty much the only science career that I knew that existed. And so I did that for a year, basically 2 years of biomedical sciences, and I took anatomy courses and chemistry and physics and biochemistry, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was really cool. I really liked the people and stuff in the program. But then in my second year, I took an ecology course just as an elective for fun. And when I took it, it was like my mind was blown. All of a sudden, like all of the passion and the love that I had for the outdoors and nature and exploring and discovering cool things about the outdoors, all of that, kind of burst out, and I was like, I knew immediately that this was what I really wanted to do. More than being a medical doctor, I knew that I wanted to be an ecologist or a conservation biologist or something like that. And so I ended up switching into the biology program, and I never looked back. I really enjoyed it after that. Throughout my undergrad, I took a lot of science courses, and one of the most useful kind of things that I did actually in my undergrad was an honors project. And this is pretty common, I think, in most undergrad universities. It's like usually a project you do in the last year of your undergrad, and it's pretty much a full year-long research project. And so it counts for like 3 courses each semester, and so you have a lot of time to dedicate towards it. And it's basically like a mini master's project. You get to pick a question, a research question, or something in a field that you're going to work on. And then for the whole year, you get to basically do a small research project from start to finish. And it was really cool. And it really taught me a lot about research and about what grad school was going to be like. And so it was a really great experience. When I finished that, I knew that I enjoyed research, and so I knew that I wouldn't get halfway through my master's or my PhD and hate it. So it was great to be able to do the honors project, not just to learn kind of new things and learn about research, but also to know a little bit about what I wanted to do in the future. I took a lot of really valuable courses in undergrad as well. And I think the top ones that I would recommend to anybody, even if you don't want to be a conservation biologist, if you want to do other types of biology or science, I think these courses would still be really valuable. They were advanced biostatistics, spatial ecology, where we learned a lot of mapping, especially with ArcGIS and other kind of spatial mapping software, and then computational tools for biology. And in that course, we did a lot of programming, and we kind of learned the basics of how to code and how to write computer programs, but specifically related to biology. So those 3 courses were super useful. They're something that I do every day in my PhD, and I think in a lot of different fields, whether you're in engineering, whether you're in medicine, whether you're in any other kind of research, I think you're going to end up probably doing a lot of statistics, probably a lot of programming or coding, and depending what type of work you're doing, you might end up using a lot of mapping stuff as well. So those 3 courses were super useful, and I'd recommend anybody take them if you're interested in pursuing that type of field. But the other thing I did in my undergrad was take a lot of electives, or at least I took a lot of courses that I thought would just be fun. You usually get some electives or like free courses in your university undergrad, and it's tempting to try to pick like, what you think is going to be the easiest course to do. But for me, what I thought was fun was doing stuff that I really enjoyed. Even if the courses weren't easy per se, or involved a lot of writing or a lot of assignments, I tried to do them because they were fun. So I ended up taking things like Greek mythology or fantasy literature or hip hop and music. And so I tried to take courses that I thought were really cool, were really exciting, and I ended up doing really well in them. I really think that when you do things that you love, you end up performing the best at them. So I definitely recommend, when you have free courses in university, don't just take super easy things that you already know. Try to move like a little bit outside of your comfort zone, or take things that you think are just like really, really cool. There's a lot of really cool things about being in grad school, and about being in conservation biology. I think, one of the big perks about conservation biology is that it's probably something you really care about. And so that's really awesome. I always feel really kind of satisfied with the work that I'm doing. I feel like I'm making a positive difference, even if it's really small. It's, something that at the end of the day, at the end of a big research project or something, I can say like, this stuff that I'm doing is helping save the world, in even just a small way. But it's something that I think is really fulfilling, and I really enjoy that. But as a grad student, kind of that's really cool. There are a lot of like perks and like good things about it. One of the things I didn't know about grad school when I started, undergrad at least, was that you actually get paid to do your grad school. So you can't do grad school forever. It's not really a job or a career, but you do get paid to do it while you're here. You don't get paid a whole lot, especially considering how many hours you're going to put in, probably, but you get paid a decent amount, and that really helps you focus and take your mind off of kind of financial responsibilities and the idea of making more and more debt. So if you go to a grad school, at least in Canada or somewhere close to home, then you'll probably get paid for it and maybe be able to save up some money and stuff. So that's really cool. But I think the biggest perk about grad school is that you get to travel usually if you want to. You get to travel for conferences or fieldwork or even just research collaborations. I've got to travel for all three of those things at different times. One of the coolest experiences I had was working as a field assistant right after my undergrad, actually. I worked for a lab at our university here that used to go down to Arizona and catch lizards in the mountains there. And so that was really cool. We basically camped in the mountains of Arizona for a summer, and we dodged rattlesnakes and we caught lizards. It was really wild. And a lot of labs do really cool research like that in really exotic places. So if you want to really go somewhere or like spend some time in a place, look for a university that does research there, and you might get to go for fieldwork for a while. You can also travel for conferences, like I mentioned. Conferences are a really fun part of science in general. Science is really international, really collaborative, and so conferences are the place where you get to meet other people in your field doing research really close to you or really similar to you. And so it's a great place to meet people, to see cutting edge research and kind of really inspiring people and work that's going on. So it's really fun just for that, but also a lot of these conferences end up being in really nice places as well. So I've got to go to different parts of the UK or different parts around the United States and even South Africa. That was the coolest conference I've ever been to. It was in the middle of Kruger National Park in South Africa, and so it was structured around you'd wake up and do a safari, and then you'd watch conference talks and network all day, and then you'd go out for another safari and then maybe have another kind of networking thing afterwards. So that was the coolest conference, and there are a lot of conferences like that in Hawaii or Madagascar or different exotic places. So and the perk of grad school is that the university will usually pay for you to go. They'll pay for your plane ticket, your accommodation, and so you get to spend a week there at a conference, and then usually you can finesse kind of staying another week afterwards as well, and you're there like for free. So it's really cool, a really big perk of grad school and being a scientist in general. And in grad school as well, if you're doing collaborative research, if you're working with other groups, you can travel to work with them too. For me, for example, at one point I spent 4 months in London, England, working with a research group there, and that was a blast. It was a lot of fun to work at a different university in a different country and kind of explore the country, meet this whole new group of researchers, where I still have like a lot of friends from that group. It was a lot of fun, and a lot of universities again have grants and scholarships that you can apply for to help pay for you to go and intern or collaborate at these universities. So there are a lot of opportunities to travel or to do really cool things like that in grad school, and that's a huge perk of it. The advice that I would give for somebody hoping to pursue a career in STEM would be, first of all, do what you love. I'm a huge believer in that, of doing what you love and making sure you love what you do. Grad school or science can be really, really tough, no matter what sort of field you're in. So I think it's really important to make sure that you're always kind of self-reflecting and making sure, is this what you're really passionate about? Is this what you really want to do? For me, for example, I started out in biomedical sciences in my undergrad, and I enjoyed it. I was good at it, but then I took an ecology course, and I just absolutely loved it. And so I had to reflect and think, is biomedicine, is being a medical doctor really what I want to do? And the answer was no. And so I switched into something else that I'm really passionate about. And so it was a big switch, and I don't think my parents were super impressed at the beginning when I switched out of being a medical doctor to go into biology, but it was something that I really cared about, and it was something I was really passionate about. And so I know, my grades and stuff, my whole way through my undergrad, I made sure to do courses that I really loved, and I think my grades reflected that. And that passion shows through to people. When you're looking for supervisors, for example, for a graduate project or for a degree, they really pay attention to whether you seem genuinely enthusiastic and passionate about things. So I think it's important to just make sure you're doing what you love, regardless of what it is, because that's gonna not only make a difference for you and your motivation and your ability to be persistent, but it's also gonna make a difference for other people. They're gonna wanna they're going to want to bet on you. They're going to want to give you scholarships or like, have you join their lab if you're really genuine and passionate and really caring about what you're doing and talking about. So I think doing what you love, making sure you're always doing what you love, is something that is really important in STEM. And I think hand in hand with that is, making sure and realize that just because you're doing what you love doesn't mean it's going to be easy. There are going to be a lot of times where you have, really tough exams that are, back to back, day after day. Or you might have like lab reports where you have to pull an all-nighter, or you have a lot of work to get done, or your experiments are not working. Science can be really challenging and really frustrating at times, but that's why it's important to do what you love, because you need to be persistent through those. When you break through those brick walls, when you like overcome those challenges, the satisfaction at the other side is huge, and the payoff is really huge. The reward to science is really huge, like especially in something like conservation biology, where you can honestly say you're helping save the world. But there are going to be a lot of challenges in the way, so don't give up. Like, stick through it and do what you love. And I think, the final piece of advice I would give is have fun while you're doing it. It's so easy, even when you're doing something that you really care about, that you really think is important, it can be so easy to just work all the time. And that's important. It's really important to have focus and to, try to limit your distractions sometimes and make sure that you're achieving to the best of your potential. But at the same time, it's really important also to just like stop, have a breather, rest sometimes, make sure you're exercising, eating well, make sure you're seeing friends, make sure you're making friends. It can be really easy to just focus on getting straight A's or something in undergrad and missing out on all the friendships that you could have as well. And those friendships, down the line, especially in grad school and stuff, those friendships are people who are going to be in the same field as you, who are going to be applying to the same jobs as you, or be in similar jobs as you. So it's really important to make friends, make connections, and enjoy yourself along the way. So don't lose sight of that. Make sure you're having fun when you're pursuing STEM as well. That would be my final piece of advice.